Hello, I'm Charles Kaler, President of the League of Women Voters of Lane County. Welcome to our February 3rd Thursday of 2021. Brought to you virtually with the help of Rhonda Livesay and Terry Parker. Thank you, guys. The League acknowledges we live on the traditional land of the Kalapuya people, whose descendants are citizens of both the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde community and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. We honor the land and the people who have cared for it and reaffirm our commitment to steward and honor the land through our work. Mayor Venice's State of the City address referred to a cascade of crises the city faced in 2020. It's a familiar list with all the levels of government, but in Eugene's case, it required continuing to provide essential services while meeting the demands of the pandemic: homelessness, wildfires, racial justice, and a recession. Other than that, it was the job of the city manager both to administer the city under direction from the mayor and the city council, and to bring to them professional recommendations to assist in their decision making, while constantly considering how to become more equitable and resilient. Just a few things. Today, I'm honored to present our speaker, Eugene City Manager Sarah Medary, speaking on the issues the city faces in 2021. After her presentation, we'll have time for some questions. You can begin to ask now via Q&A and chat, and we'll have them for after. Again, welcome, Manager Medary.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to click on the attendee list and scroll through and see so many familiar names. It's nice to connect, and you're getting such a great attendance at a virtual meeting. And I know it's always awkward to be on Zoom. So I appreciate being here. I thought I would just share a little tiny bit about myself for those of you over there that have never met me. I've been the Eugene City Manager for a little over a year now, but I've worked for the city for 25 years. So I started back in 1996 as a parks maintenance worker. So I did irrigation work. I was kind of one of these interesting part-time workers that worked full-time part of the year and half-time part of the year, and have had just an incredible career here where I've been able to just learn so much. I've taken advantage of a million opportunities. And as somebody said a long time ago, not a long time ago, but in a meeting I was in last week, a group of women leaders from around the Northwest, somebody asked their best career advice she'd ever received. And it was from someone who said, just do a good job, just do good work wherever you are. And that's kind of what I focused on. I never actually thought I'd be the city manager. I always just saw opportunities, loved serving this community, and I've ended up here, and I'm really happy to be here. I didn't know it was going to be during a pandemic. You just sort of never know what you're preparing for and what's out in front of you. But I have had an opportunity over all of those years to work in a number of different departments. I served the recreation division. I've worked in public works. I ran the planning and development department for a period of time. I was the assistant city manager. So I've moved around. I have a lot of experience, and there's some really good things that come with that I have a long history here, a long history of relationships here. And the challenge I have is to always approach issues with fresh eyes, and not to think that we've tried this before or done this before, but to really constantly be seeking new ideas and new voices to help inform the way I think. So was just talking to somebody about this yesterday, that, I approach problems with, I approach possibilities. It's like, what would be possible, as opposed to, oh my God, we've already tried this and it didn't work. So that's been really fun. I know last year when Linda originally asked me if I would come do this, she was mostly curious about City Hall and what was happening with City Hall. And I think I'm going to end with that piece, because I think a lot has happened since then. And I know you want to know about everything that's out there that we're challenged. So I would say, number one thing that I see in 2021 is still how we're approaching the pandemic and maintaining community safety. And that's first and foremost, making sure that people are safe and healthy, and that you have the services you need. So it's been a challenge fiscally. I would say one of the things that looms over me the most right now is how we are going to financially weather this storm, because it's not one fund, it's all of our fund. It's the general fund, the road fund, parking funds, and all of these you'll see as we get into the budget season, they all weave together and touch each other in ways that we're having a whole system kind of relook at how we continue to provide services with some uncertainty over at least the next couple of years. So luckily there's a number of people I think on this call even that have been part of helping create a long legacy of good financial stewardship here. So we're always in a good place to respond to challenges. But that, I would say that's a big one. How do we manage that? And as you all know, the pandemic has probably highlighted and increased some of the challenges we already had around housing affordability, and how that sort of plays out in our most marginalized and vulnerable community members and the unhoused. So our service needs, I would say, are huge right now, especially in that category at a time that we're sort of also fiscally constrained. So that's something we've been working on. I know there's gonna be questions. I think one may have already popped up in there. Climate, continuing to implement climate recovery goals. In some ways that's easier when everyone's home in the pandemic because there's less driving and less greenhouse gases, but there's a lot of other ways we'll continue to need to advance that. And I think for front and foremost, and I think people's minds right now, is the franchise negotiation that we're in with the Northwest Natural Gas. And there may be some questions that I can answer about that. But that continues to be something I'm working on every day, trying to figure out if there's a way to continue that franchise and to meet our climate recovery goals. Economic recovery, we're working pretty closely with the chamber on, could we do a new regional approach to how we kind of look at how we're going to recover from this and rebound from this. So we've been working with and talking with a futurist who, if any of you tuned into the Eugene Chamber of Commerce economic forecast, they had Rebecca Ryan, who does pretty incredible work around the country with chambers and cities on helping develop scenarios that kind of, instead of thinking about, it's sort of a simple mindset shift of, instead of thinking about what's our vision and how are we going to get there every year, it's sort of what's your vision, and then you do this backcast of what needs to happen the 19th year in order to meet that the 18th year. So it's a different way and a different approach of developing that scenario. I'm kind of excited about the possibility of that if we can get everybody on board, because it does feel like, and I'll just jump one statistic here. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who was really concerned about some car camping outside of their business, and not understanding why the city can't just do something about that. And the statistic I gave that person was, I just saw a presentation and learned that we had 1,000 calls for service for car camping or abandoned cars on streets last month. So of those, not all of them are people that are living in their cars, but a tremendous amount are. So there are a lot of people out there that need help, and it's not going to be a matter of how any one agency handles that. It's going to be all of us together and all of us as a community together in order to be able to tackle some of these things that we all want to see shift. So that's something I'm looking forward to. I want to say a couple of things that are really hopeful around what's happening out in the community right now. We've continued our organization. I'm really proud of the City of Eugene for pivoting incredibly fast to being an online work from home city. We have a lot of people. You can even tell we've moved into the LCC building, which I'll talk about. So my office is pretty much still kind of vacant. It's like sort of empty. I'm in this cave. But people, we're doing building plans from home. We're moving permits forward from home. We're doing engineering project management from home. If you have to be out, street sweeping or responding in a fire truck, things like that, clearly we're not doing from home. But everything that can be, we are trying to really limit people's exposure and keep our workforce safe. So because of that, a lot of things have just been moving forward. So when this pandemic kind of comes to a place where people feel more safe getting out and about, I think you're going to see a lot of things that are encouraging. The Riverfront Park is amazing. The construction that's happening there is you'll be able to just enjoy the river, the overlooks over the Willamette. Some of the cultural art pieces are going to be kind of mind-blowing. The space is much bigger than you think it's going to be when you get there. It's just going to feel like this downtown connection to the river that our community has wanted for a long time. We've continued forward with renovations and remodeling at Campbell Senior Center. Echo Hollow Pool is wrapping up, a brand new outdoor space. It's really going to be great for that neighborhood. We're getting really favorable bids. So our Sheldon Pool project will be moving forward this spring, and we'll be able to do all of the additional things that came with that. So that's going to be super exciting. And we've continued with things like the Amazon running trail, which you don't have to run on, you can walk, but it's got great new lighting, great new path. It's really incredible. And we'll be doing work on that whole restoration of the Amazon through there by South Eugene High School. The 13th Avenue Bikeway. There's a number of parks that are being designed that'll be under construction this year. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on that I feel like, even Fifth Street Market, which is private development, but when you go and you're like, wow, how did this happen? And where did this come from? Because I think so many people have been home. So I wasn't planning on doing a slideshow, but I do want to show one picture, and I have the ability to do that, of downtown, and I'll just talk a tiny bit about City Hall. Would that be helpful? And then you can switch over to questions. Okay, so I'm going to just share a screen here. All right. So my pointer, you can see that pointer, right? Wrapping around the old City Hall site. Can you see that, Rhonda? Okay, thank you. So this is where our old City Hall was. And as you know, we tore that down with the intention of building in this corner, kind of phase 1, and then phase 2 here. So we had been working on that when we entered into the conversation about swapping land with the county so that they could have the space to build the courthouse, and we could have the permanent home for the farmers market, which a lot of people in this community really care about. So that's when we did the land exchange. So this is now this county property. This is the front half of the butterfly lot is the farmers market, which I am super excited to tell you is also moving forward this year. We'll be breaking ground on that and creating that permanent home. And right now we're just working through what are the logistics for where they'll be this season while we work through that. The northern portion of that parcel is intended to be the future City Hall site. And that's, as we break ground on the farmers market, that will just be a gravel space until a decision is made about that. We'll be doing some minor renovations in the park blocks, but mostly we have in our council focused on kind of phasing the overall work and really focusing on the farmers market. So what that has meant for City Hall is I was approached by Margaret Hamilton, who's the president of LCC, who said they were having some struggles to maintain the occupancy in the Mary Spildy Center downtown, and wondered if there would be a possibility of city offices going there. Well, it was coincidental that our lease was coming up with Lane County. And I said, yeah, we could explore it, not thinking it would be City Hall offices, but we would explore it. And we looked around and we thought, we could actually make this work. And it allows us to test some things that are things we've been exploring with the future City Hall, which is, a little bit smaller footprint in terms of like the council chambers, but making it a more flexible space so that when it's not a council chambers, there's more public meeting space. And the LCC space actually allows us to try that. The room is about the same size. It's already partitioned in order to test, like, how can we do that? It allowed us to actually gather more space. So we have more square footage here than we did at the county space, more public meeting space, and the cost is less. So it's a real win for us because we, along with LCC, had already invested quite a large sum in bringing this downtown project to life. So it creates a it creates some certainty for LCC and allows us to test some things. It's a really great space. And I had all these other places put on here because what it means now is across the street is the Atrium building is planning and development and public works administration. And across the street this way is the library and our central services, which is all of our finance and technical people. And then we also lease some space in downtown. So we lease some space from the Woolworth building where we have our employee resource center, and we lease space from the Wells Fargo building where we have public works engineering. So you can kind of start to see this flow of city space, but we're really starting to capture a nice campus feel in this corner that we'll have for the next few years. So I thought that would be helpful for you to see. I don't want to talk too long without providing plenty of time for you to ask questions. And like, I just want you to know one of my core values is authenticity. So I will feel free to ask me any questions you want, and I will be as transparent and honest as I can be.
Very good. We'll take questions now. We started to get quite a few. So
that's always where the fun happens.
This is the league after all. And it looks like we've got some people from outside the league, which we certainly welcome. The city hall was one of the questions that we received. And I think you probably don't have a timeline, right, yet?
Is that what the question was? What's the timeline?
Yes. I think they wanted to know about it. Well, I think you've filled in that part of it. And the next is like when?
Yeah. So the current direction, we were moving forward in this phase development where we thought, we'll get the farmers market going and then we'll move into City Hall. And we kind of had these marks in the trail ahead. When we got into COVID, we definitely paused the City Hall discussion. We knew our council needed to be able to find additional funding to happen, and that the timing of continuing to have those conversations when there were so many other needs in the community just didn't feel right. So we asked the architects to stop working on it. They kind of got it to a point where they could set it down and then pick it back up. And our council has not given us direction yet to sort of start that work ahead. So I think the soonest you would see something is from the time they start picking it up and then when they would go out to bid. I mean, I signed a 3-year lease with LCC thinking that would be the soonest it could possibly happen, but it really depends on a decision of how and when to try to raise more funds to make it happen.
Very good. Another big one is, what is the plan for sanitation and trash pickup for unhoused neighbors?
Yeah. So we have an emergency operations center that's been up and running for almost a year now. And part of that work of the emergency operations center has been to plan for and deploy resources out into the community so that people could stay in place. And we started early with hand washing stations and porta potties and some temporary camping sites. We did that early, and then we changed phases in COVID, and the temporary like emergency pandemic camping spots, we shifted into what we're calling microsites, which are a little bit bigger rest stops, and we placed some of those around the parks in town. That group maintains a map. We kind of monitor the map of where all of the restrooms are placed and hand sanitation are placed, and we monitor usage, and they kind of get shifted around based on that. So right now, I think you've probably been reading in the paper because you guys are the educated people that are staying informed. We've changed our approach and what we're doing in parks, and we're, for the most part, to the extent we can, allowing people to continue camping as long as they're meeting certain criteria. And those places where we're having larger groups of people gather, we are supplying bucks and hand washing stations. So I think we'll be doing that until we shift into the next phase of this. And then I think we're all already starting to plan for and wonder how we phase into an environment where everyone's not staying in place, and what does that mean?
what about trash pickup? Is that something you can address now too?
We have, yeah. So I'm sorry, I should have said that too. We have been doing trash pickup too. So we've been sending our parks, and we have a group of staff that are from Public Works and Parks that we've been sending in to do trash pickup in all of the places where we have kind of larger gatherings of people. And I think even in some of the places where we don't have established garbage cans, I know our crews have been going and picking up bags and bags of garbage. And we have some incredible community members who might be on this call too, that have been also on their own providing garbage bins and helping pick things up. So I couldn't, if you want somebody to come back and talk about the specific details operationally of what's happening with all of these camps, I could certainly arrange for the right people to be here. So you're getting me at probably there'll be people on this call that may be able to say that's not exactly what happened at this spot, and that could be true.
Right, and I've got another one that they are asking about the 50 to 70 evictions from Westmoreland Park. Again, is that something that you can address specifically?
Yeah. I don't have the most up to date of what happened at Westmoreland Park yesterday. So I will just say this is playing out in all of our parks where there is a definite tension between allowing people to stay in place and stay safe, and also understand that neighborhoods are being impacted sometimes unfairly and inequitably. So for example, at Washington Jefferson Park, that neighborhood feels like, hey, we're taking in more of this population and more of the impacts than seem fair. So we get communications on both sides, people feeling really unsafe, whether we're asking people to move or whether they're staying. So we've tried to develop the criteria that we think allows for people to stay. And, it has to do with, distance from certain things, activities or natural resources or established camps. And then just basically sort of camp criteria, distancing and cleanliness. And we're sending outreach workers out there and staff out there to help people. We're giving them notice that they're not meeting the criteria, and then we're giving them time to get that right. And then we're giving them another time if they don't get it right to kind of know that we're going to go in and clean things up. And sometimes we're going in and we're cleaning things up and people come right back and we know that's happening and we're okay with that. And sometimes we're cleaning things up and saying, you can't be here. And in those cases, and some places we're pointing people to other places, and other ways we're not. And that's been really hard because there are not enough legal established places for people to camp. So the best that we can do is try to manage the situation by, like, you can stay here as long as you meet these criteria. So what happened at Westmoreland was a number of people were too close to the rest stop, and there's a reason why that matters to us, because we have made some early on kind of commitments in neighborhoods that, if you're willing to take, we're going to start placing some of these established campsites, legal campsites in your neighborhoods, that it won't mean that all these other impacts come with it. And so we've tried to really keep that true, because what's happened is we found neighborhoods are embracing the rest stops and the microsites, and we want other neighborhoods to embrace those as well. So they were closer, and then I know they moved to get like sort of right on that 300-foot line. And I don't know what happened yesterday at the end of the day. And I just don't know specifically of whether they actually all got moved or a number of them got to stay. And somebody on here probably knows that even better than I do.
I think you probably answered it to the best of your ability, given the shortness of the period of time. Going off of homelessness, which still seems to be quite we'll get back to, because there seem to be questions, a little different tack here. How are relations between city manager's office and the Eugene Police Force? How does this work these days with the challenges of COVID lockdowns and so on?
The relationship between.
Yeah, I don't know what that means exactly, but I'm assuming.
I
Have much
don't,
interaction with the police department?
yeah, well, I mean, the police chief reports to me, so I talk to him probably, if not every day, probably every other day. He called me yesterday to talk to me about what he was anticipating might happen over the next couple of days with the homeless. And part of what he and I have been talking about and started early on is, we've sort of de-emphasized the police role in that. Like, I don't want police to be the first people that show up at a camp. It's not a good use of their time. It's not. It creates a environment that starts off feeling just not great if you're unhoused, and probably not great if you're a police officer. So what we've really tried to do is really put more of our outreach workers in that place, and staff that are better prepared to just build and develop those relationships on the ground. So he and I were just mostly talking about, we've had a couple of camp cleanups recently that require having some partnership with police. One of them was what was happening on the railroad lines when the rail companies were building a road through their site. So there's places where they have to interact, but we've tried to really de-emphasize that.
That sounds good. And someone's interested in, it's all homeless stuff. Wow. I'm sure that we'll get into climate stuff at some point here. I think you've covered about sweeps as best you can anyway, right? Do you think you can add anything to that?
Yeah, I really dislike that term, and that's why I don't usually say it, because it's not, to me, and that's probably a reason why you're using the term, is it means something to you too. So I don't want to take away from that. But what we have tried to do to the greatest extent possible is allow people to stay in place until we reach a safety or health hazard. And that was kind of our early thing, was, once things kind of got too far, and then people said, well, what does that mean? And we developed the criteria. So I feel like we've been adapting and evolving and trying to meet the needs of this community as best we possibly can, while recognizing that there's a whole lot of other community that we also have to serve.
Yeah, good answer, I think. Here's another: what programs and plans are being made to phase the homeless into more permanent housing? And what are the plans for more low-income housing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in all of these places, so one of the things that I really appreciate about the rest stops and microsites is they're even though they're not recognized by HUD, federal government, as being sheltered, they really are providing a place for people to be, for there to be some predictability, some safety, where we can reach out and help those individuals get from that space they're in into more permanent housing, either permanent supported housing or any sort of housing, which is a lot easier to do when they're able to sort of pause and be there. So we're doing a lot of that, and our outreach workers are helping with that. We're continuing to work with the county on the navigation center, which is part of one of the elements that are, when we did a sort of a systems audit of what needs to happen to get to what people call functional zero homelessness, having a low barrier shelter and navigation center was a big piece of that. And so through COVID, if you don't know this already, through COVID, using CARES dollar, the county purchased one of the sites we were looking at to purchase. So they were able to do that with CARES money, which is awesome, because that allows that space to be used through the pandemic to help medically fragile people, which is a lot of the unhoused, with COVID and COVID quarantining. And it's a space they'll be able to continue to own, and we will transition into that navigation center. So we're working actively on that. And I have had a conversation with Sioux Sierra Lupe that I know they're doing some navigation out of that site already. So even with the COVID patients, they're able to have, a couple of weeks of contact with people, which is helping them get, their identifications back and helping them get connected to the resources that are available to them. So we're working on that. You probably saw that a permanent supported shelter, permanent supported housing on the MLK Boulevard got opened a couple of weeks ago, which is 50 units for some of our most chronic homeless, really vulnerable individuals. So that's incredibly good news. And we have more of those sort of slated to come online every year. And we're actively working with the county on that. We do have a project that's going to happen in downtown. So we bought the old LCC building, and we had recently put out an RFP for a mixed use housing. They'll have some affordable housing, kind of workforce style housing, and potentially market rate housing. We got it looks like a really good proposal from that. I haven't seen all the details, but that would be some new additional housing in the downtown. And we're continuing to partner on lots of different low income. In fact, my meeting before this, we were talking about a sort of council's goals around housing and development of a housing implementation plan, which will start to, I think, really clarify and make it really clear. These are the goals and here's how far we've gotten.
I've got a question. I'm not quite sure what's meant. They're asking what are the criteria referenced as to campers? Does that mean like our RVs, those vehicles, that kind of thing? Do you have criteria?
No, I think they're referring to the criteria that we give the people that are camping in parks. And, I'd be happy to actually, as we go along, I'll take that document and I'll drop it into your chat function here so everybody can see that. But I'm going to need to go into my email and grab it out.
Okay. Well, okay, here's something not homeless yet, I think. Let me look. Though city council sets priorities and budget officials will decide details of budget proposals, as the city manager, do you have a general wish list for the next city budget? That's a good one. Are you allowed to say it out loud?
Yeah, I don't. Well, my wish list is to implement the things that the council wants to see happen. And that's genuinely the goal. So for me, the one of the challenges for this fiscal year will be the general downtrend in all of our funds. And one of the significant ones is parking, because our parking fund has paid for our downtown police station. So that's a good example. We really have no parking revenue. I mean, I say no, it's very small. Like there is no way to pay for downtown police with the parking fund this year. So there's a number of things that I think will be built into my budget, which will be a kind of a combination of places where we're reducing or changing and adapting a service model to save money in order to at least temporarily invest in a couple of things we know we need to not lose. So downtown is one of them, like our downtown ambassadors, our downtown police, some of the downtown activities. Like we can't just like abandon downtown right now when we are really, we're seeing so many challenges there. So there's so my wish list will be things like that. Like how do we kind of patch that through at a smaller level? How do we actually invest more in how we are serving the homeless and how we're doing that work, even though we don't have you'll see some shifts, you'll see some proposals to shift some money into that. There'll be just some things like that. So it'll be, how do we continue to move things forward, even when we're in a confined, restricted environment? So it's more about it's more about like every decision we're making is setting us up for a better future, as opposed to like, well, we can't do that anymore. So it's really like, how do we still make those investments while recognizing we're in a tough time?
And a time that's always flexing. The needs are flexing. And another concern of a lot of our members is about the city's climate action plan. Mm-hmm. How's that going? How are you going to move us from plan to action?
Well, we've been doing a number of actions. It's been kind of ever since the cap got adopted. One of the things that's in there is we had created this Eugene Climate Collaborative, which is 12 agencies that I think earlier they were calling the large lever stakeholders, you know, the big organizations that can actually make a big climate change. So groups like, you know, us, LTD, EWEB, Northwest Natural Gas, that sort of group of 12, the schools, the universities, LCC, the Chamber of Commerce. And so we've been doing a series of meetings with each of those groups. So they're kind of their key leaders to kind of check in, like, what have you been doing over the last year? How do you want to continue to collaborate going forward? And just doing a check-in on those goals, because a lot of people asked us while we were doing the cap, how are you going to hold them accountable? And so this isn't really accountability. This is more like, how are we going to work together? And I think the exciting thing is so much has happened in the last year. Even like groups have just kind of are getting more and more and more invested in climate recovery. And so the conversations have not been like, why are you asking these questions? They've been, yeah, we've done that and we're doing more. And here's some other ways we want to work with across that collaborative. So I think you're going to see more exciting partnerships happening there. We've been doing some, you know, even internally, we've made some investments in shifting over our pools from natural gas to electric, some big greenhouse gas emission savings. We're continuing to make investments in alternative transportation. Like, I don't know if you've been able to get out on the 13th Avenue Bikeway, but that's pretty cool. We have more of those plans, so we'll continue to implement that. The Northwest Natural Gas franchise is another place where, you know, our council has said they're interested in a franchise, but they want to see climate reduction and climate recovery as part of that. So we're actively working on that. That will be, if we can get to that, that'll be pretty groundbreaking. I don't think a lot of cities have done that. So that'll be, I still have confidence we'll get there, even though we're missing some of our key deadlines. I still
go into that a little more, because that is what's happening with Northwest Natural is definitely a concern of our members.
All right. Well, high level, we're sort of ending a 20-year franchise agreement. So that tends to be kind of how these things work. And so our franchise was going to expire, I think, in 2019. So in 2018, we started talking to our city council about, hey, this is a franchise that's adopted through ordinance. It's councils to adopt. So getting some ideas from them about what they wanted to see in that agreement. So we've been working on it for a couple of years, and we got to a place, I don't want to do the whole work session, but essentially we started off with wanting there to be carbon reduction embedded in the franchise agreement. We had some different ideas about how we could do that. And it became clear that for Northwest Natural, they wanted to see two different agreements. They wanted to have the franchise agreement and they wanted to have the carbon reduction agreement, which we were okay with as long as they were tied together. And if you watch the work session I talked about, I actually had pieces of paper where I was like, when we say together, we mean stapled together. And when they say together, I think that's not how they were seeing it. So we ended up in a little bit of I called it sort of a kind of an impasse, because in order for us to move forward, it was feeling like the only way we could move forward would be for us to compromise our home rule. So we feel like we actually have the authority to say, hey, we're doing this and it's part of your franchise. And what they were asking us to do, if you're not really deeply involved in utilities, it took me a while to understand this, but what they were wanting us to do is go with them sort of jointly to the Public Utility Commission to ask permission, because we know we believe we have the authority to do it. Saying we don't have the authority to do it and asking permission is basically, it's just, it's not great governance if you're trying to manage your right of way, manage what goes in your right of way and how it's used. So for us, that home rule piece and managing the right of way, this is what we do. We do governance. So we aren't willing to say that we don't have the authority to do that. So that's the piece where I felt like we're not going to meet our timeline. So the franchise is actually it expires on May 11th if we don't get a new one in place. And in order to get one completely in place by May 11th, we needed to have had the ordinance language posted by tomorrow. So by February 19th, all of that would have to fully be out there so we can meet all the legal timelines for an ordinance. And it just was feeling like, last week I was like, I don't think we're going to get there because we're not going to compromise and they're not going to compromise on this. So it was mostly to let council know that, hey, this franchise may lapse. Doesn't mean that it won't eventually be put in place, but it's likely to lapse sometime in May if we don't come to an agreement by Friday. So we haven't come to an agreement. We're still working and trying to find a third place to land that allows us to still do exactly that, get the franchise, get the climate recovery. So what that means in terms of lapsing does not mean a lot for a customer. In fact, I think, if you are a gas customer and you're relying on that, you will continue to get gas. We 20 years ago put something in our code that said if at some point the franchise lapse, we have this other mechanism of collecting that fee in our code. So we're working through how would it turn from one to the other. So this turns off, but this turns on. So financially, shouldn't be an impact. And where it could cause issues is just in terms of their flexibility and ease of being able to do any work in the right of way, because they won't have that sort of blanket authority to be there and to do things. So they'll have to do more asking, and that's probably the simplest way to say it.
They'll have to get permission for specific projects. Is that what you're saying?
So we're working on exactly what this means on May 12th is essentially what I've asked. So yeah, I think it just means right now they have they have a franchise to use the right of way, so they can, it's not that they don't have to get permits, but they have a lot of authority of what they can and can't do, and that will go away. And so they will essentially be having to, I think, get permits for most of their work.
Very good. Let's see. I should have. Businesses. How is the city able to help small businesses impacted by the pandemic?
Yeah. So we have a couple of people that we put in our emergency operations center immediately, sort of in this, started working on kind of business and business recovery. So we have a couple of people that this is what they've been doing is reaching out to businesses, trying to figure out how to help. So it has ranged from financial assistance with some pass through of some of our CARES dollars to loans and grants for small businesses. So we've done some of that. We're currently doing a lot of PPE distribution. So we brought in a lot of supplies for businesses that we're helping to and facilitating getting it out to businesses. We're doing that. We've done some work with both eWeb and United Way, where we have passed some of our CARES dollars through to them that they are then using to help with daycare facilities. They're helping with low income customers and other business assistance as well. So we're not administering all those dollars ourselves. It's some is coming through the city and some are our funds going through to other agencies. And we communicate with the chamber pretty regularly on their membership, but also have connections kind of out in the business community for those that aren't chamber members.
Another question I think is important. How about city personnel management? How does current budget shortfall impact hiring, retention? Are there any departments losing more workers than others? And is this impacting city services? There's a lot in that question.
Yeah, there's a lot. So yes, to everything. We had some pretty substantial impacts in a couple of areas. So like one would be, when things got shut down and we couldn't open community centers, we've obviously not been able to operate the Holt Center or any of those facilities. We didn't hire on a lot of people we would have hired on. So a lot of our seasonal employees that do camps and aquatics and all those things, we didn't hire. So as opposed to Willamette that hired and then had to, I think, lay off, it was essentially not a layoff, but not a hire, which is the same sort of impact. We have redeployed people all over the place. So we have, we had early on, we had library staff, cultural services staff in the emergency operations center figuring out how to do pandemic response. We were able to, move them into those positions and shift their funding because of that, to try to, our whole thing is, this is it, especially early on when everyone thought, maybe it'll be 6 months, maybe it'll be a year. We don't want to decimate our workforce and then not be able to respond. We have a lot of really talented, extremely well-trained people. So we have tried to move them around. So we have parking enforcement folks that we've moved into other work units because we haven't been able to pay for them there. We've had a number of people, we have had some people leave the organization. I think it's been a couple of reasons. I think it's easier to work remotely. So people are picking up jobs in other places as well. We have some people moving. I think some of the work has been exhausting and there's like, we're out. But for the most part, we've been able to maintain the people that we can. In this next budget, we will probably see the elimination of some positions. I'm hoping that there's no individuals in them. Again, our goal will be to be able to quickly rebound. So we've also, we've accessed funds. We were able to get some of the Save Our Stages funds. So we're able to kind of keep cultural services and the Holt Center and all that work stable, and we'll be able to for a while. So we're trying to be smart about it. It's a very resilient organization. We're meeting on Zoom, all city meetings every other week, and probably this morning there were about 520 connections. Some of those are fire stations. So it's a lot of city employees that are tuning in every other week to just kind of get the lay of the land, where we at, what do we know about vaccines, just trying to be really open with them. And they ask really hard questions, just like you, some of the exact same questions.
Yeah, it's an amazing group. Interesting question here. Former Mayor Piercy had an article in the RG today. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but the question is, she asked to stop expansion of fracked gas infrastructure. Is that infrastructure different from natural gas infrastructure?
No. So, the infrastructure in the ground that moves the gas, back and forth into your house, the pipes themselves are carrying the, whether it's fracked or renewable, it's all mixed in that same infrastructure.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Are you concerned about that the city might be subject to a Boise, Idaho type class action suit from the non-served unhoused?
Yeah. So the Boise suit was interesting. The fundamental difference between Eugene and Boise, and we had a suit, I think in 2014 or 15 on this topic that we won. And it was, from my understanding, so I am really going into details here that are dangerous details, but my understanding is the fundamental difference between us and Boise is what was happening in Boise was an arrestable offense, and that is in camping in Eugene has never been an arrestable offense. It's a citation, but it's not arrestable, and it's never been about sleeping. Or sitting and lying. It's always been about the camp itself. So like the tent, the structure, the way it's written is just more tailored. So so it's different. And I think also one of the things I believe I remember about Boise was it also had something to do with the fact that all of their places that they could potentially send people were all religious institutions. And Eugene has a lot of options that don't include that, including our rest stops and microsites. So there were some reasons why this was challenged before, and we didn't, and we were able to succeed in that. If you, that may not be a success depending on your perspective, but succeed in the lawsuit.
Great. I have at least one question that I'm not going to ask you because they've asked if you have public-private partnerships with organizations, and asked specifically about the organization that she's concerned about. I would encourage her, and I'll get in touch with her later, that she get in touch with you directly.
Okay.
I think that's probably going to take more time. We're doing pretty well, though. I've got
Well,
a
if you
really
want to get there, let me just put my email in here,
oh,
and then you can
nice.
just reach out. Yeah.
All right. Then the other one I think is some crystal ball gazing. But how do you how do you what do you hope Eugene will look like and feel like in the next 10 years?
That's such a great question. Well, I hope that, there's some things about Eugene I hope never change. I do think that the investments that this community has made in their parks and natural areas and water, the Willamette River, the Ridgeline Trail, all of our neighborhood parks, our bike paths, our bike system, some of the things that we love about Eugene, I hope we're able to continue to maintain and grow and make better. Like, I love that we're making investments in our pools and our senior center, and that's amazing. I do hope that we are able to make some significant progress over the next 10 years on housing and housing affordability. And, it's the work that's happening with sort of the connections between the homeless and unsheltered, the homeless that are sheltered, our affordable housing, our sort of market rate housing, all of those things work together in a system that all needs to be organized, I think, a little bit better, and in order to really make progress on the goals in each one of those different areas. So I don't, it's really hard to imagine how we're going to get everybody housed and safe, and how we're going to sort of manage the situation that's happening right now through the pandemic, especially with this kind of looming, like, are there going to be a number of evictions at the end of the moratorium, and are people going to be even more challenged to keep their housing? I think everybody that's even close to an expert says yes, that's going to happen. But I do think that we are the kind of community that can figure it out. And I just think we have to not go into despair, and instead be like, okay, well, what can we work on, and how can we make it better? So I hope that happens. I worry a lot about our kids. I talk about that a lot, just in terms of, the city doesn't provide that education service, but I do think that our kids are the best upstream investment we have in terms of not continuing to make the situation we're in worse. And so I worry about them. I worry about how long they've been, in this virtual environment, and how are they adapting, and what are they learning, and I'm hoping that this experience gives them this extra dose of resilience that makes them maybe the best problem solvers we've ever had. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about, how we can be a leader in the climate work. And, I think about continuing to electrify our fleet, continuing to work with EWEB and LTD and Northwest Natural Gas on ways we can all kind of come together and be a leader in that. I'd love to see, I kind of with some frequency talk about the things that happened 40 plus years ago that we all still point to as these great innovative models, like the Saturday market, the farmers market, Cahoots. There's all of these things that we do here that they're 40-year-old models. And so I'm kind of curious, what are the 2020 and 2021 models? What in 40 years are people going to look back at and say, that was really cool, we should do more of that? And that's kind of what I'm looking for, is how Eugene just continues to be a really great livable city, and also a model for how others can do that.
I wanted to end it there, but I've got a couple more really good questions that aren't about homeless, I don't think. Do you have concerns about Eugene drinking water quality and supply?
Um, I'm a little bit nervous about it just because of the fires. I'm assuming that's what you mean. We've had Frank Lawson come to the city council to talk specifically about that, and it sounds like, you know, they're doing some pretty good. They're starting to do some pretty interesting work around the watershed and how to protect that. They've done that work for years, so I'm not currently concerned. I'm always a little bit concerned about the fact that we're drawing, you know, most of our water from the McKenzie, and we're a little bit at risk because of that.
And then another quick one, I think this will be the last one. Is there any thought or negotiations or anything going on with Springfield or Lane County governments to centralize or combine certain municipal services or public works?
Yeah, so Springfield has a new city manager, Nancy Newton. She's awesome. She started after the pandemic, so she is somebody that like actually moved here during the pandemic and has been trying to meet the community and meet her organization and do this work without having that kind of long history of relationships. She's amazing. We have a really great relationship. We're actively working right now on recruiting a fire chief. So, you know, we've been merging our fire departments, and we're at a place in that merger where we need to move forward. So, you know, we've done a lot of functional consolidation, but there's some places where it needs to go just maybe another step further to actually really implement those cost savings and efficiencies we hope for, because we're still have, even though they have the same logo and the same patch and they're driving sort of the same things, they're functionally Eugene employees and Springfield employees with different budget systems and different pays. And it's just that next step of figuring out what's a next step governance model short of a district potentially, or maybe a district. So who we hire as a fire chief really matters. Bringing somebody in that can take that, so just the existing merger where we're at, forward. And then we're always talking about, are there other places we should explore? So I wouldn't say there's anything really actively in motion to make that happen. But we, you know, for example, last year before the pandemic, a group of us from Lane County and Eugene and LTD went up and visited the Multnomah County, City of Portland, kind of joint housing homelessness work that they're doing. We visited their navigation center. We learned about how they established that sort of joint governance model. So we're always kind of exploring, like, what are the possibilities here? So I'm very open to that.
Very good. Well, that's our last answer. Thank you, Manager Medary, for your work. The League particularly appreciates your effort in tackling the job in this coming year. It's going to be a tough one. Thanks for all you do.
Yeah, thank you.
And to our viewers, please tune in for our next third Thursday in March. Our speaker then will be Lori Erickson, Curator of Exhibitions and Special Projects at the Oregon Historical Society. So onward in good health, and stay that way. Bye-bye.
Thank you.